Hello, I'm Adam from WhatCulture.com. I'm here at the Brighton Comic Con, and I'm here to interview the franchise, Shane Douglas. Well, my first question, it has to be the iconic moment of throwing down the NWA title. If I could just ask, first of all, who came up with it? Second of all, how many people knew? And third, what was the immediate fallout of that?
Well, it's 21 years ago that happened this past August. It was the NWA Eastern Championship Wrestling, the predecessor to Extreme Championship Wrestling. ECW, the Extreme Championship Wrestling, was born that night out of that action. We were part of the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, the oldest wrestling company in America at that time, with the most prestigious history and lineage. They wanted to use ECW. We were the only company in the NWA in the States at that time that had any real steam to it.
Yeah.
So they believed that they would use ECW to elevate the NWA back to greatness. And Paul Heyman had conceived the idea to decide, would we just go along and become part of the NWA, which with all intents and purposes had died 7 years before.
Sure.
The NWA was dead. It had a little speckle here, a little speckle there, but the NWA that I grew up watching was dead and gone. Or do we take this opportunity to elevate ECW into something much bigger? And so to answer that first part of the second part, how many knew? Paul Heyman, Todd Gordon, and me. Nobody else was in on it. That was the only three on the planet that knew. But Paul didn't come to me and say, this is what you're going to do Saturday night. He came to me and he said, I've got an idea. You can do this or this. I think there were like three options. And, and he never pushed one or the other. He told me the pluses and minuses of what he saw as the negatives and positives of each. And to be honest, up front, I wasn't in on the idea. I didn't like the idea.
Oh, really?
Because I was a kid that grew up watching the NWA. I idolized most of the people that held that belt, from Lou Thez all the way through Dusty Rhodes and even Ric Flair and Rick Steamboat, the Funk Brothers, the Briscoe brothers. I mean, the lineage was so long that I really respected those guys and what they had accomplished in the industry. So I wasn't really hip to the idea, but Dennis Corluzzo, who was the NWA president at the time, had gone on Mike Tenay's nationally syndicated radio program that Wednesday prior, and told the listeners that if you were thinking of hiring Shane Douglas for an independent show, don't, because Shane will take your money and no-show you. Now, in 37 years, I've never no-showed any company, and one time I missed a show because I was sick. I sent the gentleman his deposit back. So why he'd be saying that the week before I'm supposed to become his new champion made no sense to me. And that day when we get to the building, Dennis came up to me, who I'd never met in my life. I had heard the name. I'd never shook his hand, never looked face-to-face with him, and certainly had never worked for him. Shoved a contract in my face, and I said, I can't sign that until my attorney looks at it. And I knew I couldn't sign it if I was planning on throwing the belt down later that night anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So all day long he followed me around, even out of the loo. I come out of the loo and he's standing there, and I said, Dennis, get that contract out of my face. I'm not signing it. So we go to the ring that night, and as I'm doing the promo, at that moment that the promo comes around, here we go, Dad, that was all straight from the heart. Nothing was pre-planned. And as I'm going through those names, the reason I'm going through that lineage of names is I'm buying myself time. Should I, shouldn't I? Should I, shouldn't I? And the moment that I decided to do it was when I looked down, camera straight ahead here, Dennis and Todd Gordon and Bob Ortiz, our ring announcer, were at a table ring left. And I see Dennis Corluzzo looking at me, and he's got that contract, and as I look at him, he takes the contract on the table and slides it towards me. And that's when I decided to throw the belt down. Thankfully, it worked. Because if you look back now, from this day, people talk about it being such an iconic moment. But imagine had it not worked and the fans went, you suck for doing that. It could have really killed ECW. Thankfully, it didn't.
Of course, yeah, with the benefit of hindsight, everyone sees, now, classic moment. But beforehand, the umming and ahhing of whether not to do it, it must have been terrifying in a way.
Well, again, because, I knew what the NWA meant. I was in the industry for quite 11 years at that point, and a lifelong fan. So I knew that this could really easily be misconstrued. And so for years afterwards, every time I'd run into like Ricky Steamboat or the Funks or whatever, I'd say, hey, I meant no disrespect or whatever. And they got it. Some of them Harley Race was one that was, really liked that kid. And I understand that because it in some way was crapping on his legacy. It could be construed as. And So finally, after all these years, it is what it is. It worked for ECW. I think the industry is in bad need of another audacious moment like that, or many of them.
Do you think it, in this kind of reality era where everyone seems so smart, like, you know, the dirt sheets everywhere, do you think it's harder to pull the wool over the audience's eyes?
Absolutely, because, like you said, I always tell my son, 14-year-old son, he's complaining, I got a homework assignment. There's the answer.
There you go.
So when I was your age, I used to have to go to the library and spend half a day looking for that one answer. So yeah, the information is so much more readily available, but I believe that wrestling fans want to go on that ride. Yeah. When you go into the movie theater, you don't sit down at the movie and go, okay, this is going to be, you know, Halloween, and I'm not going to jump when the boogeyman jumps out from behind. You've paid your money, you want to be entertained, and so that's why you jump. You allow yourself to go there. Wrestling fans, I firmly believe, want the same thing. They just don't want to be beaten over the head with absurdity. Yeah. They don't want to be told some cornball, silly, cartoonish storyline that a 5-year-old can't sink his teeth into. And well, just go along with it because it's sports entertainment. The wrestling fans today want to see the believability. The question is wrestling real? Is it fake? Is it choreographed? Is it preconceived? Again, to a true wrestling fan, it's an irrelevant point. If you go out and I would defy you to tell me wrestling's fake when you look at somebody being thrown through a table, or how many injuries you saw in ECW, or in a lot of the independent companies. So again, it's a moot point to a wrestling fan. The wrestling fan wants to know. They want to see, I believe, kayfabe reinstated. Kayfabe being where we protect the inside of that industry. They want to see the heels go out and believably portray their character. The problem today is heels are worried about selling T-shirts and merchandise as part of their income. So they got to be sort of cool, can't be an asshole. And with all due respect, the franchise was never played to be cool. The franchise was meant to be a hated character. We need more of that, and the baby faces have to know how to get over. And I think if you bring those ingredients, like any good recipe, if you bring those ingredients to the table and mix the right amount of each, you can bake a beautiful cake out of that. But if not, you end up with garbage.
I mean, one of the great things about ECW was it very much didn't want to ever talk down to the fans. It didn't ever want to show them anything cornball. It could be silly. But I mean, you've worked in the big three promotions during the 90s, WWF, WCW, and ECW. What were the philosophies of each company? Like, did you gel with one, obviously ECW, I imagine, but did you gel with one company much more because of their philosophies towards the audience?
Well, obviously the NWA, which became WCW, was much more my vein. I got into professional wrestling. I had an amateur background, had been an athlete all my life, and so I had more endeavored to be that vein. I never saw myself as an entertainer, or as those type of matches never appealed to me. Hulk Hogan onto the giant, double tackling and not selling it. That wasn't my. I wanted to see the Ric Flair Steamboat takedown and counter and reversals and leg sweeps. That to me was so much more entertaining to watch. So the philosophy of the NWA I was much more akin to. I could easily adapt to that. The WWF, or now WWE philosophy, it changed. When I was a kid coming up, you had Bruno Sammartino and that whole vein. That was phenomenal wrestlers. But it did, once Billy Graham came in and beyond that, it sort of started tilting towards the entertainment stuff, but it's still strongly wrestling. I could identify with that. I could never identify with the sports entertainment. That's just not my cup of tea. Sure. Some might like it, some like chocolate, some like vanilla, but for me, being wrestling, and if Vince were standing and say, well, I'm not wrestling, I'm sports entertainment, and I couldn't agree more. I'm a fan of professional wrestling, not sports entertainment.
Sure. You mentioned Steamboat, of course you teamed with him. What was that like? How much did you learn from him?
How much did I learn from him? He was, first of all, Steamboat is probably you hear the cliches like this, but nicest guy, biggest guy, best guy. Ricky Steamboat was truly the nicest gentleman I'd ever met in wrestling, and he was so brilliant at what he did, and is so brilliant at what we did. He never was condescending, and I was put with him at the exact right time in my career. I had quite a resume under me, behind me. I'd been in the business, I think, about 7 years at that point, and I knew how to do the moves. What I didn't know was when to do them, when not to do them, when to speed up and slow down. And Ricky took me from being what would be considered a middle-of-the-card white meat babyface and taught me how to be a main event player. And I can't give a specific example, but I'll give you a general example. At the end of the night, Ricky was never condescending. He would say, oh, man, tonight you really screwed it up, Shane. He was never, ever negative like that, even when I might do that. he would say, "Hey Shane, tonight when you did that spot, that was okay, but imagine if you'd have put this and this in the middle or at the beginning or at the end." And we'd be driving through the dark, and I'd be staring out the window into the dark, and I'd, in my head, be running that through my head like a picture. And boy, that would have been better, you know. And so you just learned. And then every night on the apron, watching him, he was such a phenomenal performer when he was active in the ring, that he made it look easy. It made it look effortless. At the same time, it looked like he was killing himself or somebody else. And there were times, if you watch closely in the tag team matches with us, that I'm becoming a mark watching the match. You know, I'm sitting there, and he'd look at me, get into the match partner. Oh yeah, come on, I gotta go. But Ricky was a great guy, and I'm so blessed to have been put with him. My career though has been hallmarked by that. I trained with Dominic Tanucci and lots of input from Bruno Sammartino when I was coming into the business. Got my break with UWF Bill Watts and worked almost nightly with Eddie Gilbert, a phenomenal understated talent. Was put with Ricky Steamboat on my way up the card as a babyface. Went to ECW and became a heel working with Terry Funk nightly, and all the while working under people like Paul Heyman and Dusty Rhodes and Bill Watts and learning their styles and how they did things. So I've been extremely fortunate in my career, and all encompassing all of that. Every night I'm sitting in the dressing room with Jake Roberts over there and Harley Race over there and Ric Flair over there and Paul Orndorff over there. I mean, how could you not learn the industry?
Right. Do you feel like the current climate is as momentous as it was back then, or do you feel like there's perhaps less main event talent out there, especially in like WWE maybe?
Well, I'll make statements and explain them. I think there's far less main event talent today, but not because they want to be far less main event talent. They're far. If you remember the Steve Austin podcast when he was with Vince, and Vince is telling, well, they're not reaching for the brass ring. And when he says, well, they're afraid if they do, they'll, and well, then they shouldn't speak up. So which is it? Do you want them to reach the brass ring? Because in doing that, they'll make mistakes. I made a lot. Every wrestler that ever got over made a lot of mistakes in their careers. Very few of those stars made those mistakes twice. These kids aren't being given the opportunity to make those mistakes, so that thereby not learning to become better wrestlers or entertainers, whichever word you want to use. Reading off a teleprompter for promos. I was known as a promo guy, like Ric Flair. We looked like this into a lens when we talked. They're reading now into a television screen with a teleprompter. Hi, I'm Shane Douglas, and I'm going to kick your butt because it's WrestleMania coming up. And when you do that, I can write a brilliant promo for somebody, but after 2 or 3 or 4 or 40, 50, 60 of those, you're going to start sounding like me because every one of us writes in our voice. And I would much rather you get up there and have to at some point and maybe stumble on a word and next week be better than you were today instead of just keep reading this teleprompter. So to answer your question, I think there's far less main event talent today, but I think there's potentially incredible talent out there if they're given those opportunities and placed under the same type of pressures we were put under. Nobody ever said to me as a kid coming into wrestling, Shane, you got a day, a week, a month, a year. I knew that on any given night, if I screwed up, that could be my last night. Yeah. Even when I was world champion in ECW, I knew, look around the dressing room, Sabu, Taz, Tommy Dreamer, Raven, Sandman. I mean, the list was on and on of guys that were certainly capable of carrying that title. So there was never a time as a performer when I was active full-time in wrestling that I sat back and said, hey, I'm Shane, I've made it. I can relax. Yeah. And certainly as a kid, I think these kids need to be put under that same type of tutelage that we were put under, taken by the nose, allowed to make mistakes, and out of that you could have far more main event talent than our generations had.
You're creating your own promotion at the moment. What kind of philosophies do you want to instill in that promotion? Like what makes that promotion, a kind of an answer to all of these problems?
The first thing is we've copyrighted the phrase reality sports. My firm belief is Troy Martin's real-life story is far more compelling than anything that somebody could write for me. And that's not saying detracting from any writer, but I think fans today, because of the reality television, that's not, as we all know, is not so real, but everybody wants to take a peek behind the curtain, whether it's music industry, it's wrestling, it's the NFL, the sports, it doesn't matter. They want to take a look behind the curtain and see what's really going on back there. In this company with reality sports, is what we plan to do. We're going to take wrestling back much, much closer to sport. Wrestling back to the classic wrestling that's always been. The name Classic Wrestling Revolution is a launch name. It will change very rapidly after we launch. It's just to attract the viewers. We have 13 former world champions, not in boots and tights. They'll be coaches that will teach these kids what they know, what they learned. How did they become main event talents? How did they become world champions? What got them there? Because every one of them has a different story and a different path. If they can transmit half of what they know and what they've learned in their careers to our talent coming in, our young athletes coming in, then, and all those things we spoke about, if we give them the room to make a mistake here and there, and we put them under that type of regime where they know that they keep screwing up, they might be gone. If we put that kind of pressure on them and give them all these attributes, former world champions, a stage to do what they want, including making mistakes, that out of that we're going to come up with 64 young wrestlers that are ready to take on the world and go out and make the next chapter of professional wrestling. It's my firm belief that professional wrestling, the book, went on the shelf about 15, 20 years ago. And we're about ready to take that book back off the shelf and open up and start writing new chapters to it again. We're going to bring professional wrestling back to where it's supposed to be, kayfabe like it should have always been there, heels that are heels, baby faces that know how to get over, and world champions teaching them how to do it each and every step of the way.
Sounds fantastic. Looking to the future, who have you got your eye on in the current mainstream wrestling? Who do you think is going to be the next face of the company?
There's so many. Right now we have 204 athletes signed. We'll have an open casting call in January, worldwide casting call. So anybody that's out there listening wants to think you have what it takes to be a wrestler, be ready to come to Las Vegas and show what you got. The 64 that survive that will be the 64 that get pushed on. This isn't going to be a company where Shane Douglas says, well, I like Joe Blow there, and I'm going to take him and let him through because I like him. If Joe Blow can't do what those other 64 kids are doing, the other 64 make it, and my pick won't. I think it's just part of what we have to get back to and get it closer to that reality. It's the wrestling business. We've seen what the wrestling business has done with the favoritism and the cliques and all the politics of wrestling. What would happen if we sanitized that out of it and we just allowed the sport to be the sport? That's what I'm eager to see, and that's what we're doing. There, to answer your question of names, God, I could give you 50 names of guys that I think are phenomenal talents out there. I can tell you the 204 that we have signed are incredible talents, young talents, but they all need polishing. They all need to learn things. I haven't seen one talent out there yet that I could say that guy right now could be the main event guy, the guy that has it all, knows it all, and can be it all. They all need to learn things, and that's why we have those champions standing by to teach them.
I mean, one of the things about the reality era is if you see someone being too earmarked by management, people just get that kind of sensation they're the golden boy. It's one of the reasons why Roman Reigns has had such a big backlash. Classic Wrestling Revolution. It sounds like an amazing company, and I look forward to it. When abouts will it start to come to? We
start production January 6th. Right now you can go on Facebook, Classic Wrestling Revolution on Facebook. We shot 10 days before Roddy Piper sadly passed away. We had shot, he was our executive vice president and was very instrumental in developing the company and the philosophy. We had shot a pilot in Los Angeles. On that website or on the Facebook page, Classic Wrestling Revolution, you'll be able to see snippets of the pilot, parts of the scissor reel that we put together. And the feedback we've been getting so far from wrestling fans all over the internet is that, my God, that looks so much better than what I've been watching, or that looks so much more like what I used to watch. So that's what we're excited and looking forward to. Big challenge though, but January 6th we'll launch production, and hopefully by this time next year, I want wrestling fans, man, that's what wrestling's supposed to be.
In 2001, WWE and WCW and ECW did this huge kind of invasion angle. Now, of course, you were one of the faces of ECW, but you didn't participate in the angle. First of all, why? And second of all, what did you make of the entire angle?
Well, first of all, when WCW was bought out, again, the wrestling fans being smarter than they'd ever been, knew that it wasn't really WCW or anybody invading anybody. I made the statement after I'd left WWF in '96. After I, was basically starved up there. In 6 months of work, I was paid $6,400. I'm sorry, for the first 4 months, I was paid $6,400 $4,600. All money that draws and everything taken, $7,800. And I was a WWF superstar in the semi-main event wrestling for the Intercontinental title, and I couldn't make my $500 a month mortgage payment. And I was not a frivolous guy on the road. I wasn't a guy to go in the nightclubs and spend all kind of money like Flair or somebody. So I knew there was something fundamentally wrong. And whenever I left there, I swore to myself I'd never go back, and I hadn't. They'd contacted me many times for the new ECW and the Invasion and all of that. I was completely disinterested. For whatever reason, we can all agree to have our disagreements, but Vince McMahon just fundamentally does not believe in professional wrestling, and I'm incredibly passionate about professional wrestling. So why would I want to go to work for somebody that I know doesn't have the same philosophies as me, or even buy into the same universe that I believe in and passionate about? So I didn't see the reason to be there for it, and as such, I wouldn't be able to go there and portray that adequately for that character of the franchise or for what the angle would need to do it justice. So I'd have been doing them a disservice. I'd have been doing myself a disservice, the fans a disservice. Probably better to take the low road and say I'll not do it, and instead of partake and do it half-assed.
Mentioned the name a couple of times, so I just want to ask, the rivalry with Ric Flair or Dick Flair, where did it start?
Well, there's a million things that go into it. I'll preface by saying this. I was the guy that got into wrestling because I idolized the Nature Boy Ric Flair. To me, he personified what a professional wrestler should be. He, in the dressing room, the terms get thrown around like he was the measuring stick of, and he truly was that to me. I mean, when I watched Ric Flair wrestle, it was magic on screen. He was so well adept at wrestling in the ring, but he could also talk so well and portrayed such a great character. That, to me, that's what professional wrestling was supposed to look like. But when I met him, now granted, any of us are going to fall short because we're all human beings, and I don't for a second say that Ric Flair, I expect him to be perfect or anything else. But the fact that when I did meet him, and I was seeing him do some things that I probably wouldn't share here because of your viewers, but things that, put it this way, if you're a father and you saw him do this, you would probably shoot him, in a public place in front of children, exposing body parts, just really in many, many ways, but on a professional level, doing everything he could to hold not just me down, Brian Pillman, Tom Zank, Steve Austin, Johnny Ace, the whole generation. He had some sort of insecurity that he thought someone was going to take his spot. And I always thought to myself, you're Ric Flair, for God's sakes. Nobody's taking your spot. But he was so insecure with that and chose to go to the route of the politics to try to hold it down. And if you remember when he put Brian Pillman with him in that angle, if you look closely, Ric Flair's always shining here and Pillman's always here. It was a very coy move on Ric's part to keep him from in his mind stealing his spot, I guess. But the most specific reason was I had gone to Ric Flair, again, somebody I idolized, and asked him, can you please watch some of my I know you're too busy, and if you don't have time, I totally understand, but could you please watch some of my matches and give me some feedback? And he said it would be an honor. So over the next couple of weeks, he's given me very generic feedback. Great fire, good selling, good bumps, but nothing specific. Hey, you screwed up the arm drag spot. Nothing like that. And I used to, back when I was a younger guy, I would do a cross body block in every match. Top rope cross body block. So for weeks, I was telling myself, he's punking you out. He's not even watching these matches. But I didn't want to believe that, so I kept telling myself, don't do this, don't do this. And I finally decided, I'm going to not do a cross body tonight and then ask him how it went. And I came back from the ring, and he's going, same thing, great fire, good selling, great comeback. And I said, how was the cross body tonight, Rick? And he went. And if you freeze it right there, in my head, I'm going, please say you didn't see a cross body. Please say you didn't see a cross. I wanted so much to believe in him. And he thought about it for a couple seconds. He looked at me and went, perfect, better than Steamboat. And at that point, he went, and just shriveled in my mind because I thought, I'm now in the position where I've had hundreds of kids in the business come to me and say, Shane, can you watch my match and give me feedback? And I tell them one of two things, yes, and if I say that, I watch and I give them feedback. It may not be what they want to hear, but I give it to them. And a lot of times if I'm too busy, if I'm getting ready for my match or whatever, I'll tell them, I'm sorry I don't have time, maybe next time. But I'll never tell a kid in the business, yes, I'll watch your match and give you feedback, and then give them BS feedback. And, to me it was just such a letdown because Rick knew I had told him multiple times how much I idolized him and looked up to him. And so to me it was just such a disrespectful and condescending thing to do to a young talent in the business.
Shane Douglas, the franchise, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Great. I'm Adam from WhatCulture.com, and I'll see you soon.